Dmitry Medvedev, deputy chairman of the Russian Security Council, said that if the Europeans are facing a cold winter, they should not blame Russia, but themselves. To quote him, the European fools who were played by the Americans, forcing them to bear the most painful consequences of the sanctions against Russia, while in fact it was the Russian Federation itself which drastically reduced the gas supply to Europe. And this is but one example of how Russia shirks contractual responsibilities. In 1925, Adolf Hitler outlined a very effective propaganda technique that he called die große Lüge. And when a lie is so enormous that no one would believe that someone would have the audacity to distort the truth that far. As faithful disciple of the Führer, Vladimir Putin chose the große Lüge as one of his favorite methods of communication. The Kremlin blissfully ignores all accusations and often absurdly tries to shift the blame for their own crimes on Europe. So, how is Russia justifying its dealings at the expense of the European Union? My name is Gregor Razumovsky, and today I tell you a little bit more about 5 things the Russian Federation accuses the West of doing, but in fact very much does itself. Russia asserts that missiles are positioned in the European Union, which are banned by the Treaty on the Elimination of Intermediate-Range and Short-Range Missiles. This was a claim in December 2021 of the Deputy Foreign Minister of the Russian Federation, Ryabkov. He said that if NATO member states don't provide Russia with security guarantees, the Russian Federation might retaliate with military means. In 2019, Russia criticized NATO for refusing to agree to a moratorium on the medium-range and short-range missile deployment in Europe. In fact, the countries of the alliance rejected Russia's proposal because Moscow itself consistently violated this treaty. In 1987, the USA and the USSR signed a treaty that marked the end of the arms race of the Cold War. This treaty provided that both parties eliminate within 3 years cruise and ground-launched ballistic missiles with ranges from 500 to 5,500 kilometers. About 2,700 missiles were eliminated, including at least 1,846 Soviet and 846 American missiles. Member states of NATO implemented the treaty and have adhered to it since. In 2013, the USA accused Russia of stationing banned missile systems and concealing them. The Russian Federation vigorously denied this until 2017, when it had to admit possessing 9M729 and SS-8 ground-launched missile systems. These medium-range missiles can be equipped with nuclear warheads and have a reach of 500 kilometers. All attempts to convince Russia to honor its obligations under the terms of the treaty have remained unsuccessful. And as a consequence, the USA declared in August 2019 its withdrawal from the agreement, as the treaty had become de facto invalidated because Russia failed to meet its terms. Russia habitually blames various European countries of supporting ultra-nationalist movements. In May 2022, a poster appeared in Moscow calling for the denazification of Sweden. It claimed that prominent Swedes, such as the world-famous storyteller Astrid Lindgren, supported Nazism. In fact, Russia itself actively supports neo-Nazi and far-right movements. In the early noughties, neo-Nazi organizations presented a real challenge for the Russian security forces. About 500 racial hate crimes, destructive hooliganism and even murders took place in the country every year. The situation stabilized when the Russian intelligence services made a pact with the leaders of the largest gangs. Since then, neo-Nazi organizations have been closely cooperating with the FSB. Among these extreme right-wing organizations number the Russian National Unity, the Combat Terrorist Organization, the Combat Organization of Russian Nationalists, and the Russian Image, to name but a few. In the last decade, supporting neo-Nazism in Europe has become part of the responsibilities of the Russian intelligence services. In 2017, a Swedish court of the city of Gothenburg convicted 3 citizens of Sweden for organizing terrorist attacks on refugee shelters. The explosions took place in Gothenburg in November 2016 and January 2017. 1 person was seriously injured. The court asserted that the organizers of the explosions were members of the Swedish neo-Nazi group, the Nordic Resistance Movement. The Security Service of Sweden found out that 2 convicts in the case of the explosions were Viktor Melin and Anton Tulin, who underwent military training in Russia before committing these crimes. In 2018, Russian sources wrote that German military pilots quitted en masse because they didn't want to fight against the Russian Federation as they were supposedly preparing for. In fact, 7 pilots decided to withdraw from the service in the Bundeswehr. However, there is no evidence that this is in any way connected to Russia. The East Stratcom Disinformation Task Force of the European External Action Services emphasizes, and the Russian sources don't present any facts to prove their theory. Russia calls the threat of imminent NATO expansion the sole reason of the bloody war in Ukraine it has unleashed. However, is there any real reason to blame the alliance? Until June 2022, NATO doctrine defined Russia as a strategic partner. The alliance regularly offered Russia cooperation in fighting terrorism, providing support, investigating drug trafficking, and combating international terrorism, and developing emergency response. The statement that NATO wants to surround Russia is just ridiculous. Russia's land border is over 20,000 kilometers long. Less than 1,300 kilometers, just 1/16 of that border, are shared with current NATO member countries. So, is it really an issue with the alliance? Russia didn't attack the Baltic countries and Poland when they joined NATO. It didn't invade Finland and Sweden when they announced their intention to join the alliance. Paradoxically, Russia decided to invade Ukraine in 2014 when the vast majority of citizens, that is 60%, were against joining NATO. At that time, applying for membership was not even considered by the political leadership of the country. There were no NATO troops, nor military structures on the territory of Ukraine. And there are still none of them. It would seem that the Kremlin's favorite boast that Russia has never been the first to attack anyone and it wages only defensive wars because it has to defend itself doesn't stand up to the facts. In January 2018, the Ministry of Culture of the Russian Federation banned the screenings of the English and French satire film The Death of Stalin in Russia. The movie has been denounced as a sacrilegious portrayal of the victors over fascism. Russian officials accused the European producers of trying to falsify history and promote fascism. And in 2015, for a similar reason, the Russian Federation forbade the showing of the film Child 44, co-produced by the USA, the UK, Czech Republic and Romania. That movie is about a series of child murders in the USSR. In fact, Russia itself has been skillfully using cinematography as a propaganda tool for a long time and allocates huge state funds for it. Comedies, dramas, biopics of Russian production, directly or indirectly, sell the Kremlin's policy as normality to viewers. For instance, a propaganda film August the 8th by Russian director Gianni Faizev, 16 million euros were allocated to this film. The plot is based on the propaganda fake that in August 2008, Russia did not attack Georgia, but that it was in fact conducting a peacekeeping mission. At least 100 million euros were allocated for the creation of yet another propaganda film called Crimean Bridge Made with Love. The recipient was the director Tigran Keosayan. The picture shows the construction of the bridge that would connect the mainland of the Russian Federation with the Crimea, which was illegally seized by Russia in 2014. The screenwriter was one of Putin's ideologues, Margarita Simonyan, the chief editor of Russia Today. It is noteworthy that the film producer, Timofey Sergeyevtsev, is the author of the article entitled "What Russia Should Do with Ukraine" for the Russian state-owned news agency RIA Novosti. This article openly postulates the ideas of de-Ukrainization, ethnic cleansing and repression. The historian Timothy Snyder considers this article to be yet another evidence that Russia's acting towards Ukraine is genocide. Russia condemned the education reform in Latvia. The law, which was adopted in 2017, made the Latvian language the main one for education and set a gradual transition to Latvian until 2022. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation called the implementation of the reform an odious decision and decried it as discrimination against Russian-speaking people. The enemies of this reform organized a picket in Riga for Russian language in schools. Somewhat suspicious was that most of the protesters were pensioners. According to the Constitution Protection Bureau of Latvia, the organization Latvian-Russian Union that held the protest is funded by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation. The Latvian education reform does not forbid the use of the Russian language. It offers bilingual study for students up to the 6th grade. Apart from this, at schools for ethnic minorities, the children can learn native languages, literature and cultural studies in the additional courses. Meanwhile, in 2017, President Putin declared that everyone citizen of the Russian Federation has to know the Russian language. The dictator stressed it is not possible to reduce the time spent studying Russian in the national schools. In July 2018, the State Duma of the Russian Federation adopted the amendments to the education law. Besides, the amount of time spent teaching the native language and literature in the national schools was reduced. Just an hour for each subject per day. This decision provoked protests in Tatarstan and Bashkortostan. The Tatar language is one of the most widespread in the Russian Federation. However, the number of Russian schools teaching in the Tatar language significantly decreased since the 90s. According to data for 2014, there were 757 such schools, where more than 5.5 million Tatars studied. But the most alarming indicators of the disappearance of a national language is in Buryatia. It could be ascertained that only 13% of Buryats know their own language. This is the YouTube channel, The Power of Reason. Always remember that the true power lies in rational thought and a clear mind when we're threatened with the daily flow of disinformation and the manipulation of news. So please do the reasonable thing and subscribe to our channel right now.